Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. Where you can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 167 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on how do online trolls link with sadism. So this is a great personality psychology based podcast episode, because even though on the podcast before, we've looked at different personality traits, or we've looked at the dark triad, and we've also looked at sadism a few different times. Today we're actually going to take a brand new take on sadism and actually link it to online trolling behaviour though, because I've not really been a victim per se of a trolling behaviour. Behaviour, because I know other people have actually got it worse than me. But as I mentioned before, when I said on Twitter though, whether I've got the COVID, in case anyone wanted to actually contact me, tons of anti-vaxxers, and I'm really sorry, Americans, the Republicans have decided to attack me, call me a liar, and to say that I was some part of this sort of conspiracy. Absolute rubbish, and it's just seriously, COVID is real, etc. But I did just laugh at those people. And then I just quickly deleted the post because I didn't want 10,000 comments. So anyway though, so it is Friday the 26th of August 2022 as I record this. So this is an absolutely brilliant podcast episode. So moving on to psychology news section, we're going to be reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one I really do like. So the first one is, we underestimate how enjoyable it can be to just sit and think. It can be hard to find the time to just think, to daydream, let your mind wander, or immerse yourself deeply in an eternal world. So this is despite the fact that there is a multitude of research suggesting that letting your mind wander is a good for well-being. A new study suggests another reason why we may prefer to keep busy, rather than taking a moment to stop and think. Writing in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, the team finds that we consistently underestimate how enjoyable and how engaging just thinking can be. So I sort of have two personal thoughts on this though. One that's actually quite general, one from last night actually, funnily enough. So, but the more general one, one is that I never just tend to sit and I think that, if I'm doing steps, if I'm pacing, etc. Etc. Or just doing health stuff, I do actually just quite like to think that I never get too deep, because of what I tend to be thinking about stuff that's university related, business and business and devising related, and more though, and it is useful though, and going on to the more nuanced thing that from last night, but it also reflects a wider point though, when my mental health's bad, sitting and thinking about it and actually making yourself work through it, just so you realise what's sort of actually going on. That is actually really helpful though, so I really do recommend that. So sitting and thinking can definitely have great benefits for you and mental health. So the second one is, sensation-seeking drivers are more likely to speed. Why do some people tend to drive faster than others? Researchers has thrown up a number of answers, including gender. Men tend to drive faster. Age, younger people do the same. And also with various psychological traits, including impulsivity, sensation-seeking, psychopathy, and my favourite word to pronounce, Machiavellianism. Speeding caused about 26% of fatal driver accidents in the US in 2018 and 30% in Europe in 2019. Notes Yung Jong at Kung Hee University. I really apologise, I've completely butchered that. I probably didn't even remotely make it sound right. In South Korea, and colleagues in a new paper in Scientific Reports. Understanding the factors most likely to contribute to speeding could enable more targeted interventions with the aim of lowering that death toll. Most previous research in the field, however, has asked participants to report on their driving speeds and style. This approach is vulnerable to people misremembering or believing that they are safer drivers than they actually are. Though, instead, the South Korean team explores people driving more directly using a VR car driving stimulation. So there's not a great amount that I can actually say about this, except from it's always really good though to actually explore our personality and actually how different personality traits can actually increase certain behaviours. And I suppose that one actually ties up quite nicely in today's episode. So the last one is, lonely people are less likely to feel moved by displays of kindness. Loneliness is a significant issue in the UK. According to the Campaign to End Loneliness, 45% of adults feel occasionally, sometimes or often lonely in England. Around 25 million people. Loneliness has been associated with changes in brain structure, and that can even make us feel worse when we have a cold. A new study looks at the link between loneliness and another factor, feeling moved. Writing in Motivation and Emotion, a team from Jagiellonian University in Poland finds that lonelier people are less likely to be moved, potentially a side effect of their lack of belief in others' good intentions. So we've covered this quite a few different times on the podcast about loneliness in different areas though, and I'm sure that if you go through the backlist, then there's probably about 3-4 episodes minimum, a minimum dedicated to the topic of loneliness though, but this only adds to the need and the urgency about why we need to end loneliness. And actually, going back to a topic that I covered last week in the psychology news section about picking up the phone and actually contacting an old friend there, where that actually ties into it because they might be lonely, so it might be a good idea to reach out just in case. So it's just something to think about. So I really hope that you enjoyed the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So, but this week I've been doing quite a wide range of university things, things and other stuff. And for example, non-fiction research, research though, a new books, and I've been slowly chipping away writing bits and pieces. But in terms of university stuff, so Monday I had a meeting about my final year project. My final year project and to the literature associated with it. There were, for example, theta brain, theta brainwaves, and what we're actually looking at. So I won't go into too much detail because even though I've looked at what we're doing in a theory, I won't really be until the week before we go back to university, which is when we're being trained in the EEG machines. That I think I will fully understand the full extent that we're doing. But this afternoon, after I do this podcast, I'm actually going to write up a introduction plan for for my dissertation because as another girl said to our PhD supervisor, I think you can call it that. Well, because your third and the final year is actually quite busy, and it can actually be quite full on. Sometimes it's actually a good idea to get the introduction done before you go back, just so it's one less thing that you actually need to do though. So that I'm quite open to, and that I think it will actually be quite a good idea. And then on Wednesday there was paperwork. Yes, today they were I'll be doing the plan, but then I've also been socialising with family friends after the past 3 hours. So 3 hours. So that was a surprise, but a really good one. But it has sort of thrown my day out. Yeah, it was so nice seeing them though. And an absolute massive thank you, but to Corey D this week, who actually left a comment on on the blog post called "How Can Psychology Help Governments During the COVID-19 Pandemic?" Yes, he said, I think it's a he. Good at reading your posts. So a massive thank you, Corey, because that specific post I really enjoyed writing them and actually talking about that, because the problem I say in air quotes here is that psychology okay, well, it's sometimes psychology can actually be really very vertical and knowledge based, but it's actually really nice. But it's actually really nice to be able to apply it to the real world, which is why that episode and the whole pandemic was actually quite good that way, because because we were able to apply psychological knowledge to a massive problem. Not that the governments actually, not that the governments actually use psychology, even though psychologists aren't experts in human behaviour. And if you were wanting to tell me your thoughts and feelings on today's episode, then you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment on the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi-whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you, because it really helps make the podcast feel like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Personality Psychology and Individual Differences. And the reason why this is a perfect sponsor for today's episode is that because sadism is a personality trait, and this really great, really easy to understand book it gives you a lot of information about what are personality traits, what are the biological and the cognitive explanations for how personality develops, and then also what goes into other stuff like the dark triad, the personality psychology behind religion, politics, hate towards veganisms, and so many more great stuff though, but that I really cannot recommend enough, because personality psychology, personally, when I first came across it, I thought it would be such a boring module, a module there, but I was so blown away when that prize and that passion really does come through in this book. So definitely check it out. So that is Personality Psychology and Individual Differences, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, local bookstore, and local library if you request it. So let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about why most online trolls have subclinical sadism. And this is just such a brilliant episode. And because I've already given a slight introduction to it in the bit before the psychology news section, I'm actually just going to dive into it today. Introduction to Personality Psychology of Sadism, Dark Triad, and the Dark Tetrad. On the podcast, we've covered the Dark Triad in lots of different ways throughout our growing backlist, as the personality traits of psychopathy, narcissism, and my favourite word, Machiavellianism. All these traits share several characteristics in common, because the people high in these traits all tend to be deceitful, vain, aggressive, and callous. However, in more recent times, some researchers have introduced the personality trait of sadism into this group, creating a dark tetrad instead of triad, due to sadism refers to inflicting humiliation, cruelty, suffering, harm, or pain onto others, entirely for the sake of experiencing enjoyment and pleasure and dominating others. In addition, people with subclinical sadism, which is something referred to as everyday sadism, may express cruelty in this, I think, is just such a weird way to put it, but apparently more socially acceptable ways, which I have to admit sounds absolutely awful, because surely cruelty is flat out wrong. But this does include examples like watching disturbing movies, playing pranks, playing violent video games, and more. But how could these people seek other ways to express their hostility? For that answer, we need to look at a meta-analysis by Thomas and Eager, 2022. I know this podcast does mainly focus on implications, results, and what it actually means for all of us, and I know that personally I do find that just a lot more interesting compared to the methodology, but I do like to keep the podcast a bit varied. Therefore, the meta-analysis used 50 studies in their analysis, and these studies were cross-sectional in design, used a mixed gender sample, except for 9 of the studies, and they were all published between 2013 and 2020. So, of course, this is good because we know that the meta-analysis uses modern research, resulting in a good temporal validity. Overall, it gave the researchers a total research sample of 22,179 participants, with most of the studies conducted in the United States and Europe, as well as a very wide range of behaviours were measured both online and offline. For example, when it came to online sadism, antisocial dating behaviour, cyberbullying, and online trolling behaviour, and a lot more were measured. And when it came to offline statistic behaviour, aggressive humour, hazing, and sexual aggression are more all measured. In terms of the results, the researchers found that there was a moderate effect size correlating sadism and offline aggression and aggression online. This was the larger one of the two, because the aggression on the line was 0.5, but that was the correlation. In addition, a strong effect size was found for the personality trait of aggression and sadism. An intermediate effect was found for anger and proactive aggression, which the authors of the paper noted. Sadists, open a quote, may also aggress against innocent others without warning, close a quote. Sadism and trolling behaviour. Linking this back to the topic of the episode, the researchers found a strong association between trolling others online by disrupting them, upsetting people, or harassing them, as well as other types of cyber aggression, which has been supported by other studies, including the 2014 study Buckles and 2014, that outright stated, open a quote, online trolls are prototypical everyday sadists, close quote. Lastly, the meta-analysis found that everyday sadism is associated with a wide range of aggressive behaviours towards them. For example, sexual coercion, intimate partner violence, extremist or radicalised behaviour, sexual aggression, and cyberstalking. Conclusion. To wrap up everything, previous research shows us how high levels of sadism are associated with aggressive acts that are quite frankly awful, from torturing animals to severe bullying, hazing, as well as cyberbullying. However, that is always clinical sadism, to the best of my knowledge. Subclinical sadism is more prevalent, and it is less likely to result in extremely aggressive acts like I described in the paragraph above. Yet, we mustn't forget that even small amounts of something can result in aggressive actions, because that is what this meta-analysis concludes. Even low levels of sadism are associated with violence. Therefore, if given the right context, many sadistic people will happen to behave aggressively. And here is a quote taken from the review. Open a quote. A moderate relationship between subclinical sadism and aggressive behaviour, as defined by acts ranging from verbal to physical and sexual aggression and violence. Close the quote. Meaning that this is something that will be interesting to look into in the future, because clearly just because something isn't fully clinical doesn't mean it doesn't have an impact on our behaviour and levels of aggression. And just to quickly wrap up, in case you're wondering why statistic people would troll other people, Buckles in all 2018 helps to provide some answers. For example, statistic people derive pleasure from seeing others suffer. They tend to minimise the harm of their actions, and they have a more positive reaction to harmful situations than other people. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and that you got something out of it. I know that this was definitely more of a contemporary twist compared to the usual sadism stuff. But personality and sadism is a really interesting area to look at because it has so many facets. So if you enjoyed today's episode and you know someone who would also enjoy it, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help us spread the word about the podcast. And definitely check out Personality Psychology and Individual Differences, available in all of the usual places, and you can buy it directly from me at payhip.com/Con Whiteley. But if you didn't want to buy a book, but you still wanted to give the podcast a bit want some support, then you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Con Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to conwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to conwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.